Our vessel cleaved northward toward Narvik, that rugged Norwegian fjord harbor cradling the lifeline of Finnish nickel or shipments to the Reich's insatiable forges, vital sinew for Krupp's steel behemoths and Messerschmitt's wings, nestled in the labyrinth of the Lofoten Islands, some 200 kilometers beyond the Arctic Circle's ethereal veil, where the midnight sun lingered like a reluctant lover in summer, and the polar night cloaked the world in ink-black despair. Narvik's waters had run crimson in 1940 savage skirmishes, where Royal Navy destroyers had dueled Kriegsmarine cruisers amid the aurora's ghostly shimmer, their salvos etching fiery arcs across the northern firmament. Now the British, having wrested naval supremacy in the North Sea's churning cauldron, their home fleet of phalanx of ironclads prowling like wolves from Scapa Flow, stalked us with a trident of threats. Capital ships, 15-inch guns, thundering from over the horizon, U-boat hunters, wolf packs reversed in depth-charged barges, and swordfish biplanes droning low through fog banks, their torpedoes a silver scimitar slicing the swells. Our freighter, a weathered tramp steamer requisitioned from Hanseatic hulls and rechristened in the Navy's gray bureaucracy, mounted meager wardens, a scatter of 20mm anti-aircraft guns sputtering like cornered ferrets, and machine gun nests crewed by sailors, with salt-cracked lips and eyes hollowed by vigilance. We maintained ceaseless sentry, life vests chafing like pennants against sweat-slick tunics, their kapok buoyancy a mocking talisman, as we scanned the slate-gray waves for periscopes feather or contrails wisps. Quarters lurked in the hold's Stygian gut, a steel sarcophagus reeking of diesel and damp wool, where bulkheads wept condensation, and the thrum of triple-expansion engines vibrated through hammocks like a dirge from the deep. It was in that sepulchral cradle, amid the creak of straining plates and the faint, briny exhalation of bilge pumps, that I absorbed the third act of Roper's tragedy, his tale unfolding in whispers over tinned sardines and ersatz tea, the narrative's poignancy sharpened by the hull's hollow heartbeat. The climate conspired against us. Bone-numbing cold that clawed through greatcoats like spectral fingers, perpetual gloaming where the sun skimmed the horizon like a skip stone, casting pallid smears on ice-flecked bergs that calved from the Lofoten's glaciers with muffled thunder. Deck time dwindled to desultory forays, stolen breaths of brine-scoured air, the northern lights occasionally draping the masts in veils of iridian and violet, a cosmic aurora borealis mocking our mortal fret, lured back by the hold's fetid warmth. Idly, I voiced the abyss's arithmetic. How swiftly could we claw from this iron tomb if a fish's fang finds us? A grizzled sailor, his beard frosted like hoarfrost on a hawser, clapped my shoulder with a sailor's fatalism. Fret not, lad. The sea's embrace is swift mercy, its chill a lover's kiss, slaying in seconds whether you cling to the keel or cartwheel from the casings. As if that sepulchral solace sufficed not, he appended with grim relish. A fortnight passed, a collier met a tin fish off Narvik's narrows, name escapes, but familiar as a fool's face. Vanished so vehement most souls sloshed below decks in the slurry, lungs leaden with brine, while the deck's dozen savored the privilege of polar plunge. Hypothermic hush in heartbeats halved. Your pick, slow suffocation or swift shiver. Silence sealed my lips, for revelation rent the veil. The doomed hulk was Roper's own, his final flotilla, the torpedo's kiss a clandestine kiss of the kismet that claimed him in the North Sea's numbing Nadir, that I in ensuing dawns, Roper shadowed closer than in life, his specter a steadfast shade, woven into the warp of my waking, as palpable as the pulse of the propeller shaft thrumming through the planking. As we ghosted past the capsized Tirpitz's twisted turrets in the Tromsø Fjord, that beached behemoth, her 38 centimeters barrels skyward like feudal fists against the fjell's forbidding flanks, her hull a rusting requiem where barnacles feasted on the fallen. He was kin to the sailors' shades sloshing in the scuppers before our gaze, their oil-slicked ghosts gliding in the gunwale's gloom. He was my comrade in calamity, kin to Paul Walter's stoic command in the Carpathian's crags, the blind man's unseeing, unblinking valor in the Volga's verge. These souls shared scant save subjugation to the same maelstrom, each essaying endurance by his innate ethos, as we all must when anarchy's anathema reigns, law's lattice lacerated by the leader's folly. Over half a century span, Roper revisited in reverie a myriad meditations, his memory a mordant muse. Victim of Nazism's Nadir, as was Theo, my treasured tutor from the Scotten Gymnasium sunlit stacks, where his spectacles glinted as he unspooled Euclid amid the scent of oiled oak desks. Today, Roper ranks among Holocaust's harvest, though not gassed in grim Auschwitz, but gulped by the North Sea's glacial gullet. The same Semitic scorn that shoveled 6 million to crematoria's cough consigned him to the cod's cold crib. Today, remorse rends. Would that comprehension dawn that doomsday dawn in 1944 watches vigil when he voiced the vanishing, the vans of the vanished trundling to Treblinker's trap? God, would that insight ignited earlier, in boyhood's heedless hour, when I hurled epithets at a Jewish lass in the Leopoldstadt's lanes, her braids bouncing like black ribbons in the rain. She too the satanic spite's spoil, her fate a footnote in the final solution's foul folio. Despite Britannia's blockade, HMS Hood's heirs and King George V-class Leviathans lurking like Leviathans in the leads, their astic pings a predator's purr, swordfish stooping from carriers' catapults with torpedoes trailed like harpoons. Our tub threaded Narvik's needle unscathed, the Fjord's mountains a fortress of Fjord. Air fresh billet, company quartered in a commandeered schoolhouse, its slate roofs sagging under snow surfeit, chalkboards scarred with ABCs and arithmetic, desks dwarfed by our duffels, replenished with raw recruits and refurbished material, the armorer's anvils ringing like requiems. Comfort's connotation belied the bedlam. My torments taproot the lieutenant usurping command, a Bavarian mountain soldier from the Zugspitz's peaks, Iron Cross first class glittering like a guilty star on his leather pants, a pedagogue by peace dimes, pen whose blackboard baton now brandished bayonets. Presenting the platoon, rifles reversed in ragged ranks, the wind whipping wool like whips, he espied the lacuna. Gas masks, where? Discarded, Sir Lieutenant. Discarded? By whose fiat? Mine, Sir Lieutenant. This terse triomph triggered a tempest. Tirade torrenting like a Tyrolean torrent, recriminations raining like rusted rivets, reproaches rebounding off the rafters. Defense essayed, silenced by snarled silence. The deluge unrelenting, second sally, Sir Lieutenant, severed by seismic snarl. Quiet, quiet, you shithead. The epithets excrescence and execration on honor. Shithead, a slur implying craven contagion. Cowardice's contagion in Hitler's horde, unbecoming an under-officer even in the leader's farce, where sergeants flog for less, cogitations coalesced, implications illumined, relaxations ruse, riposte reserved, the lieutenant's lapse a lever to leverage. He held hegemony, heralding with gusto, sabotage against armed forces property, court-martial, trepidation twisted. Tribunal's toll could trust me to minefields maw, D-minors doom a danse macabre with death's dice. Unequal fray, David to his Goliath, guile the slingstone. Counterstroke cunning, formal complaint for invective's insult. Shithead, sting a stain on soldier soul, threat to his troop's sergeant advancement, promotion's precipice postponed. Celerity crucial, criminal codex Oslo bound, preterition perilous. Initiative, punishment report for report, formal fiat to front superior for reprimand or redress, full fig. Steel helmet sans gas mask, the helmet's harness a harness of the hunted. Ingress lieutenant's lair, with permission? Salute studiously stiff, deferences deferral till dispensation. What do you want? Sir Lieutenant, recant the insult if you please. Out. Monosyllabic expulsion. Minutes metastasized, rear report, not my will, but by order of a lieutenant. Ad rem, punishment for 5 days of confinement. On that day, you disobeyed the order of silence. Confinement, confinement in bread and water, punishment for the mockery of guilt, veiled revenge, exaggerated exaggeration of the motion of recanting the insult. Other weakness, Complaint to Norris aggression et punishment irrational. Volunteer in leaders phalanx ad defensionem patrii. Non-ut ob omnibus insultatis pacer. Leader support, leader on my side, I his, suggestion of comrades. Grievance gravity up to gravity allows. Now a gentle struggle between the battalion leader and me, wanting to promote the lieutenant his friend, to persuade him to bring complaint, the lieutenant out of action, subject to complaint. Gas mask charges removed by negotiation. Now heading for Oslo. The major, as usual not with me personally, sends one of the lieutenants. Duty to Joseph, the National Socialist Regimental Leadership official. 2/3 conversations with Joseph, bombarded with phrases. Leader needs disciplined soldiers, life/death struggle against the Jewish International. I answer, I know, but all soldiers need to be disciplined, subordinates and superiors. Neither side gave in, we made no headway. Finally Joseph became impatient. Names, spoiled boy, touch me not. I thought these expressions were harmless. Indeed, I accept them, interpreting them as a sign of weakness. My opponents no longer hope to persuade me to accept the punishment. Bitter irony. I have finally gained respect. Suspicion confirmed. Joseph ends the negotiations on a weak note. Mark, as an official of the National Socialist leadership, you should know better. But I see you have learned nothing, not even in the Hitler Youth. Now the major's change. He could not guarantee a promotion, the total annulment of the punishment imposed by the squad leader. On the contrary, the leader's illusion left no doubt about the determination to carry the complaint all the way to the highest authority. Therefore, the major sought a compromise. Careful not to create the appearance of a formal report, he invited a conversation. You are a brave soldier and a good National Socialist. The leader would be proud of you. But you disobeyed the order of the lieutenant. I will not let the misdemeanor go unpunished. Therefore, I changed the punishment to a simple reprimand. What? Not immediately responding, he takes a harsh voice. My final decree, accept or dismiss. Dismissed. Surprised. Simple reprimand. The lowest punishment in the armed forces. Crimes now out of the major's hands. No motive for continuing the fight. Court-martial months delay. In fact, before the military bureaucracy could act, Graz's brains were drained. The general's instruments of the East/West surrender were signed. And then I did not foresee, nor did I wish, but a change in the air, and things more serious than the inept court-martial solicited. Shortly before Christmas, the group was reassigned to Borfeld, a small point on the Narvik-Sweden railway, directly opposite the border. The mission was to protect the border/railway, which once carried nickel from Finland to Narvik, the Reich's vital iron. The nickel mines had been abandoned in the meantime, and the Swedes probably wouldn't have allowed a ship through their land. So we had no real purpose there. That I believe that if Graz had moved us to central Germany, he would have liked to send us to the collapsed eastern/western fronts. I saw no Norwegian civilians in Burrell. The group occupied a splendid 3-story building in the middle of nowhere, which had once been the home of retired Norwegian railway workers. We treated the wooden structure reasonably, although I can't guarantee it was as well preserved as it should have been when we left. A letter from the Reich Commissioner of Norway. Treat Norwegian civilians fairly but firmly, whatever that might mean. Also told, German soldier raping Norwegian girl in Kiruna, sentenced to death and executed. Morale/discipline were slipping. In January 1945, I called Joseph, still offended, but seeking help to restore discipline. We need your help. Major will send you to the National Socialist course. I don't remember the name of the place, but I do remember a beautiful place by the sea, not far from Narvik. I accepted the change, expected better living conditions, and felt slightly guilty that I had contributed to the declining discipline, that I had fought against the military regime and won. A few days later, I sailed to the NS course, a splendid voyage through icy fjords, adorned with snow-capped mountains. 2 German nurses on board, clad in gray caps/white cornets, just escaping from the environment of coarseness/vulgarity, and I noted their poise and feminine dignity with a mixture of sadness/gratitude. It turned out that they were heading to the same place, After the German surrender, I met in a British POW camp under decidedly less pleasant circumstances. The NS school was housed in an exquisite building, a former hotel. Living conditions were better than I had expected. Semi-private rooms, real beds, white linen, central heating, sparsely used, and lovely women running the hotel. Even better food, not rich in calories, but more carefully prepared. After dinner, everyone was sick, my first since 1939. Various official instructors, mostly old gentlemen, who behaved with change, relaxed atmosphere, but tinged with unreality. Only at home one could think of the inestimable patience of the military/civilian population, as we enjoyed the exaggerated luxurious conditions. At home the Nibelungen fought on the field, a heroic dynasty from the Germanic saga/Vagian work. We sat in the barracks, pontificating about Aryan superiority. When I sensed that others shared my dismay, a few words, sincere but subdued, were received with applause. One member with tears in his eyes. His entire family had been wiped out by a bombing raid. The political doctrine was orthodox, but relatively devoid of the anti-Semitism that had been absorbed in my childhood, and which I now resent. The instructors emphasized the positive rather than the negative aspects of racial ideology. The Scandinavians were praised as the purest Aryans in Europe, the Norwegians especially as powerful allies. One instructor had a surprisingly positive attitude toward England. He spoke glowingly of Admiral Nelson/General Wellington. This gave me the courage to follow suit when given a talk. As a natural scientist, I added Isaac Newton/Charles Darwin to the list of Anglo-Saxon heroes. I believe that my predecessors' presentations of Anglo-Saxon creationism were so persuasive that even the orthodox Nazis would see the point. Encouraged by the resonance of the audience, I cast the Germanic Anglo-Saxon family of nations around the Atlantic. Sorry to say, a shiny picture tinged with some residual Hitler youth/school indoctrination. I thought I should include bait for the orthodox audience. Not yet completely freed from the prison of the mind, I added a few foolish phrases of Nazi ideology, living space, Genghis Khan's hordes. This concession made the ideological dish more palatable to the Nazi audience. It had not yet been contaminated by the toxin my blood had purified. However, we received sincere but cautious applause. One instructor shook his hand. Well done. A few days later, returning to the regiment, he was summoned to Joseph again. He had received a report on the NS school speech, now wanting to express his reservations. Talk less about England, more about the Jews, he warned. The major orders you to deliver a real fighting, holdout speech to the regiment. Talk about fighting to the death. I still consider it my duty to do everything in my power to strengthen the fighting spirit. So I gave a patriotic speech. Today, I wish I had never given it. Best for the sake of effectiveness, worst for the sake of time. I had learned from the school/Hitler youth/late NS education. I composed a speech quoting Frederick the Great Bismarck Hitler. Even going far, I quoted the inscription on a monument mentioning the Spartans under Leonidas against the Persians. Traveler, coming to Sparta, announce. We here, lying down, obeyed the law. I had learned the epigraph from Paul, who quoted it in a letter. I carried it with me until the retreat, now used in conjunction with the school's Battle of Thermopylae. I remembered Frederick the Great's quote to the generals on the morning of the Battle of Leuthen. Sir, I will either conquer the enemy or bury myself before his batteries. Only for want of a quote about Stalingrad, a little uneasy, because Hitler had not sought glory in that disastrous battle, did I digress, indulging in the creativity of history against better knowledge. The whole Sixth Army, 250,000 men, fought to the death, as the leader had ordered. No one noticed the deception. So towards the end of my life, I preached the steely moral of fighting to the death, albeit with a somewhat shaky conviction. The lieutenant was greatly impressed, and so were most of the others, but I had mixed feelings. If my speech could turn a man from a despiser to an admirer, something had certainly gone wrong. So it was, In a speech the next day, the lieutenant announced that he had recommended me for promotion to sergeant. The promotion had been approved before the Third Reich collapsed, but it only came to me later, when I was in a British POW camp. Then I felt a bitter sense of promotion, and I tried to persuade the British officer who was asking me to ignore it. But the stoic man put me in the register of sergeant. Not only that, in one of the last days of the Third Reich, a lieutenant, placing himself squarely before me, begged, "Bruno, strike my nose, my mouth and my mouth." Discipline suddenly lost its love. Dignity never had its medal. Values inverted. Instead of insulting, it urged. It desired a blow from me. Not a modest girl, but a shepherdess. "Give me a pep talk," it begged. I am in church listening. A man transformed from a sadist into a masochist, suffering from boredom. I disregarded all military etiquette, abruptly rolled over and left standing. Then from outside the radio bulletin, never to be forgotten, from the leader's guard, our leader Adolf Hitler, fighting to his last breath for Germany, killed in battle. The announcement was followed by dark and haunting funeral music from Twilight of the Gods, the fourth Wagnerian opera of the Ring, the death of the gods. Devastated. The mental pain as intense as it was physical. Since I am utterly at a loss to describe it, I will not attempt it. The plain fact, Hitler's death was a nadir of my life. The next 12 months remained in the valley of despair until I recognized the slow/unwilling monster I was grieving. Growing awareness of the antidote, the poison Hitler had injected into my blood for over a decade, finally broke. The truth shall set you free, the Bible says. It did. In the days immediately after Hitler's death, I desperately sought solace from a kindred spirit, in person or spirit, except for one companion. Not a living soul around me could feel my pain. Officials, once arrogant/now unworthy of any help. The almost omnipotent propaganda machine suffered the same impotence. Yet in one of his last broadcasts, he offered German radio solace, quoting a familiar voice, sounding with dignity, though led by a man as lost as I, Sven Haydn, the famous Swedish explorer, German friend of World War I fame. Boy, through the deserts of Asia, I read his book. Now I read Adolf Hitler's eulogy, a tragedy as capable of irony as comedy. In tribute to the leader, Sven Haydn spoke the genius of Europe. I drew a passing solace from imprudent words that a congenial companion mentioned. A recent corporal named Willie, the home of East Germany, where he was waiting to return. Not the kind of person who would be moved to tears by Schubert's poem, but simple/honest, to others/to himself. Love of country, socialist leanings, the official secret society. Most importantly, the bitterness/loss of trust united us. "I believe in nothing more," Willie exclaimed in anguish. "I hate the world." As painful as the circumstances were, he smiled and recalled the school days, where I played Hamlet, the leading role. How tired, dirty, flat, fruitless all the uses of this world seemed to me. After the war, Willie was feared by the sirens of the communist East German regime. On the contrary, I thought he could not enter a second mental prison, had he escaped at the first moment. Today, I would consider this man of uprightness to be the grace of fate. When the news of the unconditional surrender came, it was revealed that there were a few anti-Nazis among us. They were understandably silent. Now they showed their consolation/congratulations in various ways. One risked his life celebrating Germany's victory too triumphantly, coming from another regiment, not personally known, but heard by hearsay. Charges of corruption of fighting spirit were written against him. Not knowing the name, I will call him Celebrator. Hearing the news of the surrender, the Celebrator ran around joyfully, shouting unconditional surrender incessantly. I was angry, and Willie/a few others. Today I realize that I have wronged a man who was almost delirious with joy, a patient comrade, perhaps a victim of more serious persecution if the Third Reich had lasted a little longer. Still, I was sad, Celebrator rubbing salt in my wounds. A few days later, it was announced, a commando unit of the Royal British Army, heading for the Narvik Sea. The officer in charge radioed advance orders. to separate from our weapons and surround the men/weapons with barbed wire. So we did. When I threw the rifle into a pile of war material, I felt an almost religious liberation. I never touched a weapon again in my life. Celebrant, having heard the news that the British were coming, boarded a Swedish train to Narvik, operating once a day. This was not unwelcome to two SD men from the Security Service SS branch, assigned to our group, responsible for searching trains to from Sweden. They suspected that Celebrant had been given special treatment by the British to seek information. A few days later, Celebrant was returning from Narvik. The SD men gathered a small group, including Willie/me, to intercept the man as he disembarked. I am not sure of the specific intentions, but I fear that at least some of them had violence in mind. I am truthfully saying that I did not actively participate in such acts, but what I would have done if others had used violence, I am not sure. I will say only, I was terribly afraid of some unjust action by my comrades. We stood in the dark/cold snowy tunnel of the railway waiting for the train. One man accidentally struck a wet stick into the power line, electrocuted. I wished for Finland or the moon. At last the train arrived. To my great relief, Celebrator was not on it. The next day, the SD men wanted to search for the hateful man again, but were persuaded to let him go. Thus I was saved from becoming aware of what might have been one of the last crimes committed in the name of the Third Reich. The British were still nowhere, and we continued to protect ourselves with our weapons. We finally learned. The commando unit reported not to Narvik, but to a former German reinforcement base nearby, which they chose as a transition camp for POWs to be sent to Germany. Since I had learned a little English at school, I was assigned as an interpreter. Willie's farewell was one of the saddest moments of my life. I had known him only a few months, but he had become a true friend, in the best sense. Now he stood at the gate saying goodbye. Sensing my feelings, he tapped me on the shoulder, unable to speak. Then I jumped into the truck, carrying me to the transition camp. I never saw Willie again. There were a few British soldiers in the transition camp, not enough to guard 100 Germans. So we guarded ourselves. The German colonel in charge of the internment reported to the British colonel, the commander of the entire operation. The English soldiers were all old gentlemen, correct, almost cozy, but not fraternizing. As an interpreter, I had daily contact with them. Sometimes they ate sandwiches in the presence, hard to bear because of the hunger that had been a constant companion for the past 3 years. Sometimes the German contingents would leave the field, heading for the nearest port, where a ship would take them to Germany. Or so we thought. Once a Russian general appeared, and we learned that the East German soldiers were to be handed over to the Soviet army. It caused heart-rending tragedies. First, they begged the British to send them to West Germany. The British refused, bound by treaty to extradite them to the Soviets. Denied escape, some committed suicide. Others tried to falsify the soldiers' identification. As an interpreter, I saw these tragedies firsthand. I rarely see people so terrified/desperate. Meanwhile, I watched the Russian general with his scarlet-red insignia and striped trousers. It was strange to think of him shooting an enemy, without a gun. I thought he was pitiful, but perhaps a work of fiction. Yet the British looked more humane. So glad to have West Germany home, but worried about Willie. Today, I fear he has not survived Soviet captivity. Summer now. As an interpreter, relatively free to move in the free time. Sometimes I would walk to a nearby alpine lake, where I sought solace in the beauty of nature, as I do today. I would whistle classical music, this time, of course, not in a happy mood, only heroic. Sitting by the lake, I would meditate on the German defeat and seek solace in the glory of days gone by. From one of my parents' last letters, I knew that they had evacuated the Teutoburg forest, a long hill in northwestern Germany, running north to south across a plain. In 9 AD, this landscape was the scene of a historic battle, the Romans under Varus against the Germanic tribe of Cherusci under Arminius. The popular statue of Arminius, surnamed Hermann Cheruscus, holding his sword to the sky, now stands on the spot where 3 Roman legions were destroyed. When I was about 12 years old, I visited the memorial with a Hitler youth near the junior hostel. The guards who recounted the battle said that the Roman Emperor Augustus' voice still echoed through the forest at night. Varus, Varus, return the legions. He did not speak the language in which he lamented, but the childish mind was so impressed that I went out at night to hear the imperial voice. When the wind whispered in the trees and the oxen called through the darkness, I imagined I heard the emperor's desperate cry. Now stunned/desperate at the lonely lake in northern Norway, remembering the national sanctuary in Teutoburg forest, I wonder if Arminius became a hero more than Hitler, and the heroic music whistled Beethoven's Eroica more than Wagner's Twilight of the Gods. Gradually, envy/fear led me to blame Hitler for losing the war. If I had known his crimes, the feelings would have been incomparably stronger. However, I made my first attempt later to free myself from the chains of mental imprisonment, though not clear at that time. Not much consolation for pain, but collected enough to begin to distrust Hitler/Nazism. Today I understand that I have undergone a fever detoxification, which precedes the emergence of healing. That on my way back to the lake, I met 2 nurses from the NS training course. They hadn't gone home yet, but had volunteered to serve in an improvised hospital for the soldiers' transition camp. We're on a journey to seek peace/solace, the major said with a gentle smile. The word struck me ineffably. Oh, I exclaimed as if delighted. Are you going to that lake? Yes, he replied. How did you know? Because, I stammered, because I know you. You have to go there, you of all, you especially. It will do you good. Now the nurse, unable to find the words, murmured, wonderful. She added, wonderful. A little later she added, come tonight, we'll have a concert. Come at all, it will do you good. The concert was a wonderful performance by a German military string quartet. Before the last piece, the gentle colonel announced, now we'll play something that I'm sure is close to your heart, a slow movement from the Emperor's Quartet by Joseph Haydn, which still serves as the German national anthem. Never in my life have I felt the nobility/beauty of this melody so deeply as I did that summer evening in northern Norway. Technically, the execution may not have been perfect, but the music breathed life into it. Over the next 12 years, I had heard the melody 1,000 times by stormtrooper bands, in a tempo more martial than anthem appropriate. Now I understood the inconvenient truth. Noble/gracious things can be misused by ignoble/ungrateful minds. Another episode walking in liberated Norway. A comrade and I were walking along a scenic dusty road when we came across a group of young Norwegian soldiers. They seemed happy. I envied their innocence. I thought they had just come from England, now rejoicing in the new freedom of their beautiful country. One of the Englishmen asked, what are you doing here? We are walking, I replied. You must not, the young man warned, in a voice more of embarrassment than conviction. You are prisoners of war. The boy had reason to be angry, but he sounded almost apologetic, as if he regretted meeting us. Others felt the same gentle embarrassment. I felt bad that we were spoiling their joy. While they were deliberating what to do with us, I watched their honest faces, thanking fate for not having to stare at people anymore. Finally, they decided to let us go. They were leaving. I wondered what we would have done if the situation had been reversed. In September 1945, my turn was to board a ship heading home, once a German troop transport crew. Due to the mines laid by both sides of the war, a dangerous/insidious journey. For reasons unknown, the ship took us only to Trondheim, where we stayed for a few days in an improvised camp. We walked through the pleasant town, guarded by Norwegian soldiers. Some civilians watched us from the sidewalk, surprised by no demonstration of hatred. 6 years later, my older brother told me about his POW experience in France, decidedly less pleasant. The next ship, once a German troop transport crew, finally took us to Neustadt, a small Baltic port. To get there, we had to cross the Kaiser Wilhelm Canal, which connects the North Sea to the Baltic. When the country came into view, all the soldiers were on deck, generally a decidedly unwelcome sight. Destroyed houses, blown-up bridges, and wrecked ships littered the landscape. but some civilians on embankments were clapping their hands, like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. All the soldiers hurried to receive the warmth of the thanks, the ship dangerously leaning to one side. The captain from the bridge begged us to move to the other side, but not easily, for the ship tilted so severely that we could crawl on our hands/knees across the iron deck. Slowly the ship returned to its upright position. Some of us applauded, others laughed timidly. 1945, I laughed rationally. I thought it cruel to be so close to home, so late in the history of the Third Reich, and to die for it. Neustadt, the British took us to another castle, where we lived separately from where we lived. My group had traveled by rail to Münster, Westphalia, for the final surrender. The town and its beautiful churches had been brutally destroyed. Half a century later, as an American, I revisited them, fully restored and more beautiful. Now on my last day as a German soldier, I stood with a group of a few thousand others in the open space of Münster for the official surrender process by the victors. The British officer in the booth conducted the matter in German over the loudspeaker. He repeatedly demanded order, but I noted no particulars. Everyone wanted to go home. No one else wanted to attend the military circus, except for the British officer, who seemed to have a strange predilection for Prussian discipline. He dismissed us standing erect, theatrically descending from the booth to make it according to the German military code. Not content, he repeated the discipline several times. The formation lasted about an hour, which no one except this British officer enjoyed. "Well," said the next one, "the British have some stinkers among themselves, as we do, hope not in the same profusion." I was eager to see my parents, especially anxious to escape the military. For nearly 6 years, I had tolerated an inhuman state of affairs, where one mental dwarf runs a whole group of men like a herd of oxen. Now, having suffered perversion again, ironically, the British officer conducted the final episode of my military life. "The German official lost in you," I muttered, while the pompous "as still commands" rang through the loudspeaker. Finally, the fool, tired of the game, handed over to a subordinate who seemed to have more sense in his head. Without a sound, the circus ended. Everyone received a certificate of discharge and a railroad ticket to their final destination. Free at last. No war, no army, no weapons, no officials, no one telling me what to do. The Nazi party vanished without a trace. With it, the little propaganda minister and spokesman who could tell me what to think vanished. The lies of Aryan superiority and Jewish inferiority fell silent. What a comfort to throw off the last vestiges of national hubris and racial arrogance. The Third Reich left no legacy except corpses/rubbles. Its place was taken by freedom never experienced/invited. Painful and uninvited, though freedom nonetheless. Although my mind was still full of despair/humiliation, I suddenly felt a wonderful sense of wonder/gratitude, as if mental chains were loosening and ideological poison was being injected. The destination was the small town of Erlinghausen in the Teutoburg forest, a long ridge running north to south across the northwestern German plain. The train journey was as miserable as anything. Although this part of northwestern Germany had seen little fighting, the devastation was substantial. The railway cars were full of holes and mostly without window glass. Even the small train at Erlinghausen station badly damaged. The miracle was that the trains were still running. The long journey from the station at the foot of the ridge to the town at the top, the station virtually destroyed, the town untouched. In the city hall where I wanted to ask my parents, I had barely finished the sentence of the 2 younger secretaries. I had barely uttered the name of the family when the first exclaimed, "Manspade, swimming pool." "Look how happy," the second exclaimed before I had finished my question. And I was happy. The unexpected warmth of thanks warmed my heart, and my thanks were equally heartfelt. After receiving the receipt of the account papers, I set off for the community swimming pool on the edge of the town, where my parents now lived. My father was alone at home in the bathhouse, seeing me, walking with a stick, embracing me with his usual warmth. But how emaciated he seemed! He was astonished. His head was only skin and bones, giving the appearance of a dead head. He swallowed the dry bread with me in a moment. My father had always been a glutton, which made him particularly vulnerable to the near starvation of the post-war years. About 30 years later, after his death, when I enjoyed a plentiful meal in America, I often wished that my father would join me for a feast. Strangely, when I felt the desire, I also wanted to receive food from Jewish hands. Today, it is clear, this Freudian fantasy arose from the desire for a sober experience that would cure him of his anti-Semitic mania. On the day of his return, my mother happened to be on a hoarding trip looking for food, a younger brother and sister with her. The 18-year-old boy had recently returned from American captivity. In 1945, he had been drafted into the elite Grossdeutschland division. In Czechoslovakia at the end of the war, avoiding Russian captivity, he had reached the Americans under cover of night, to whom he surrendered. His sister had also returned from Czechoslovakia, where she had spent the last years of the war with the school. No word on his older brother, who had served on the Western Front at the end of the war. A year later, we received news from the International Red Cross, as a POW working in the French coal mines. He returned in 1948 a broken man. Finally, my mother and two younger siblings returned from a hoarding trip, not having experienced the bad news, carrying a little food from my mother's sister, who was married to a steel industry executive. Apparently, my uncle had ways of getting food on the side. A few years later, when I was a student, the same aunt/uncle supported me with food/clothes. In the autumn of 1945, millions of hungry people were on the road, looking for something to eat from farmers. Railroads so packed that passengers stood on running boards or sat on roofs. Farms raided by hungry people, in a situation so desperate that farmers sometimes used dogs to repel the hungry onslaught. Everything valuable, necklaces, silver, furs, was offered for food. People of grim humor. A farm without a Persian carpet in a substandard pigsty. Bread on the black market for 1,000 Reichsmarks, bacon for 10,000. Always in such a situation, a few filthy rich, many starved to death. The death toll in the winter of 1945 to 46 in Western Germany has been variously estimated, from a few hundred to a million. Among the most desperate of the hungry, farms were raided. Harried farmers joining forces to defend themselves. In confrontation, the right of the superior always prevailed. Weapons and knives were strictly forbidden to the occupying forces, so clubs were the main weapon of the hunters. The gathering of food also in the mind of my father. Returning the next day, he led me on a walk to a small farm on the plain at the foot of the Teutoburg ridge. There a goose roaming freely showed itself sadly. Apparently, it had long been a potential roast, but the big dog always thwarted its plan. To our dismay, the keeper was still around. The expedition ended in failure. My family, especially in the narrow confines, evacuees and strangers in a small town, had to eat even less than the locals. The little food available on ration cards was about half the calories needed to maintain body weight. All the members of the family showed various symptoms of malnutrition, from edema to a dull pain in the back of the head. Once my mother showed with tearful eyes how my younger brother made small cuts in bread so that he would know how much to eat in the morning. Once my father bought a bag of sugar beets for some tools. My mother added flour, giving away the last of the necklaces. He prepared a tasty soup from 2 ingredients, which prompted his father to ask a frank question. "Why didn't you make this dish more often on good days?" "Because you didn't eat it then," he replied. At that time, Sister Hall had a job as a caterer with the local British occupation forces. We had hoped she would bring something to eat home that night. We were sorely disappointed, for it was strictly forbidden to take anything from the premises. We took this for sheer cruelty. However, we thought the food prices too low, a calculated revenge, too vividly reminiscent of the post-World War I siege.